disruptive innovation. So hand over to you now, Eddy.
Thank you. I want to talk about right retention as we experienced it at Sheffield Hallam, so I'm not talking about it in general. And the lens I want to look at it through is the one of change and disruption. So there are really three main questions I want to answer. The first one is right retention something that we can call disruptive? What does it change in the way we work for the three main stakeholders, being authors, publishers and university libraries? And what effect did it have when we introduced rights retention? So that will be my lens for today. So there are three stages. I want to talk about why we implemented rights retention at Sheffield Hallam first, and then what we implemented, then about whether it is disruptive and what it changes, and finally to have a look at, after half a year, what has been our experience and how have stakeholders responded, including our authors and publishers, and what has been the overall effect. So why did we introduce rights retention? Well, that in itself is actually quite a difficult question. We, as Sheffield Hallam, are one of the UK's largest universities when you look at a student population, and it is our vision to be the world's leading applied university. That's quite an ambition. And I think our ambitions for open research and open access link to that vision. So really we think of open research and open access in particular as a way to share our research beyond academia with the people and organizations that we work with as an applied university. And therefore open research is a goal in our library plan. And I think the reader in criminology, Jake Phillips, that you see on the right hand side of this slide, has put it perfectly. So he works in probation, he studies probation. And he gave me the following quote: "I'm looking forward to being able to maintain the rights to the work that I've done, as it gives me more scope to share articles on social media, increase readership and make it easier for policymakers and practitioners to engage with my research. They can use it to improve their practice and make probation more effective with no one being in breach of copyright law." That's really our main aim. But there are, of course, other reasons, and to be honest, they weren't all as important as the first one that I gave you. But the other reasons probably are that we want to benefit from immediate open access, have all the benefits of open access that is immediate. Our aim is also to pursue a financial sustainable way to provide open access. And we can only do that by fixing a market that is clearly broken, where for-profit publishers and not-for-profit universities are fundamentally misaligned, where we have the phenomenon of double dipping that you're probably all aware of, and I think it would be better to call it triple dipping, but nevertheless. And a situation where we have shrinking budgets, and therefore we need to look to a financially sustainable way to achieve open access. Third reason would be to achieve a more favourable negotiation position with publishers. Now, these negotiations are of course conducted by JISC, but we as the sector provide requirements for those negotiations through several working groups. And I think if we have a negotiation position where we can fall back on the fact that we can access scholarly papers for free via a green open access mechanism, that might actually put a little bit of pressure behind those negotiations. And the fourth reason would be to comply with immediate open access requirements from both governments and funders. So we all know about the Plan S requirements that require immediate open access under a Creative Commons attribution license, either via the gold route or via a green route, but not hybrid. Probably less well known is the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which says that the public has the right to immediate access to scientific publications without payment, even if copyright or an exclusive license to publish is given to the publisher. And as an example, the Republic of Slovenia adopted a Scientific Research Innovation in Activities Act last year, which basically tells publishers who are based in Slovenia that they must ensure open access to the content of all peer-reviewed articles that receive 100% public funding. So it's very clear that the movement is towards open access that is immediate. And I think that that's probably was a very convincing argument when we went to research leadership to adopt a rights retention policy. Okay, so what did we implement? Well, our open access policy applies to all members of staff and all students. and it requires that a copy of all research outputs is deposited with the library, and we will make that available to the public as soon as we can. And all scholarly articles must be made immediate open access under a Creative Commons attribution license. So that's really those are the policy requirements. And to achieve that, all authors must add a statement, a declaration of right retention as part of their manuscript submission to the publisher. And it's a very famous declaration that you find on the right-hand side of the slide. How it works is that the author automatically gives a license over the accepted manuscript to the institution. So it's a CC BY license before they even submit to a journal. And that is achieved via the open access policy, which itself is linked to the staff IP policy and to the student terms and conditions. So this means that rather than that the author actually retains their rights, they open up the accepted manuscript to make it available to everyone under a Creative Commons license. To make this work in copyright law, we need to notify the publisher that this prior license exists. And we use two main ways for that. The first one is that we wrote an official letter to the most important publishers, for us anyway, to tell them that our authors are giving us a prior license, and we're asking our authors to add the statement, declaration to their accepted manuscripts. So this means that right retention then is a condition under which the author enters into a contract with the publisher. Finally, we are asking, obviously, our authors to deposit the accepted manuscript into the repository. And then we make it available as soon as possible upon publication. But we do think that a delay of about a month is acceptable for administrative reasons only. Okay, so that's roughly how it works. Is this disruptive? Well, it depends on how you define disruption, obviously, and I've tried to summarize that on the right-hand side. So the principle of disruption really is that we disturb or interrupt a normal course of events so that the trajectory is forever shifted. So it's a fundamental change that is permanent. And you probably are aware that the term disruptive technologies and disruptive innovation emerged in the 1990s when the internet emerged and businesses like Amazon to describe how a market can be changed forever by a newcomer in the market like Amazon. So this is all about business models that change a market forever. But soon after, the term disruption was also applied to other fields, including science. And that's actually quite interesting, because the paper by Wu et and others from 2019 that I quote there, or that I refer to, actually says that you can distinguish disruptive papers and developing papers. So disruptive papers would be papers that disrupt the field of science or technology to which it belongs by introducing something new that eclipses attention to previous work upon which it is built. But developing papers then represent extensions or improvements of previous theory, method, or findings, where disrupting papers represent punctuated advances beyond previous theory, methods, or findings. So that they see disruption and developing as two opposing types. We'll get back to that in a second. Very interesting is another extension of the idea of disruption to the field of systems theory, where they talk about disruptive intervention. So it's not so much a disruption of a market, but rather a provocative act that seeks to change ways of doing in a system to achieve positive social change. And that would be an idea that is akin to activism, although disruptive intervention is not an act of protest, but is rather an act of provocation. So I think it's fairly easy to argue that right retention is both a disruptive innovation in that it seeks to change a market, as well as a disruptive intervention, because we would like to change that market to achieve some social good that we can achieve via immediate open access. So on the face of it, I know I've always argued that right retention is probably a disruptive thing, but is it? Really, I've been wondering lately, is it radical enough? So if we look at the distinction between disruptive innovation and, let's call it, sustaining or developing innovation, that I think that what we're doing with right retention is rather tweaking an existing system, an existing green open access system, where we are still using commercial publishers, although we do not recompense them for their efforts, and where we can achieve change by changing the system of ownership of scholarly work. So in a way, you could argue that right retention is a sustaining innovation or a developing innovation rather than a disruptive one. The truly disruptive way to change the market would be to fundamentally upset the system by bypassing commercial publishers entirely, by setting up a system of diamond open access publication platforms that are owned by the community, such as Octopus, or perhaps even Wellcome Open Research, etc., if they drop the APCs. So I think there are more disruptive, more radical ways of achieving what we want to achieve. And that right retention is actually a fairly mild provocation, if you like. And that would be my point. So how did it change ways of doing? Well, a couple of comments on publishers' business models that are threatened by right retention. And I'd like to approach this by simply quoting what publishers have told us. So these quotes come from objections to the UK Scholarly Communications Licence and Coalition S plans from the Publishers Association and STM, and from Elsevier, who wrote an infamous email to the editorial board members when UKRI announced their new open access policy. And this is what publishers told us then. The first one is all about money, obviously, because it provides a challenge to the vital income that's necessary to fund the way they work. That was their first argument. The second argument was that if they don't own exclusive publishing rights, they cannot help authors to fight against copyright infringement. I've always found that a quite puzzling statement. And the third one is that they fear that immediate green open access will replace gold and hybrid paid for open access. And that in the end, they argue, would mean that publishing for them is not financially sustainable and that it undermines potential support for open access journals. So the argument is that it would actually be counterproductive. And especially when we're talking about their objections to the UK Scholarly Communications Licence back in 2017, they argued that if we were to introduce a right retention mechanism, then they would have to require authors to ask for waivers to those policies, and that would increase the administrative burden for authors. Now, this, of course, was quite fanciful, because now we've introduced right retention policies. This has not happened. So it's clear that publishers think that their business models are being threatened by rights retention. It changes ways of working for authors as well. This diagram sort of outlines the things that we're asking authors to do, and some are new actions because of right retention, others are things that authors have already been doing for quite a while. So when they're writing a paper, authors would need to have conversations with their co-authors about rights retention, just as they would have conversations about where they are going to publish and whether they are going to sign the copyright agreement with the publisher. They would also need to have discussions about applying rights retention to the paper. When they submit a paper, we're asking them to include the declaration, the statement. On acceptance, as per usual, we would expect authors to deposit the accepted manuscript into the repository. That would be something that they've already been doing for donkey's years. And when the version of record finally appears, we would like them to notify the repository of the publication date so that we can actually make the work available from the repository as soon as possible. So I guess for authors, this means that there are some additional actions and new expectations that we're asking them to deal with. And we're also asking authors to more proactively assert their rights than they've done ever before. And the question really is, do they have the confidence and the support to do so? So I think for authors, things change as well. And then for us in the libraries, on the one hand, I think our workflows simplify. First of all, I think we are acting on publication rather than acceptance with right retention. So we still ask for deposit on acceptance, but this is mainly so that we have the accepted manuscript in a timely fashion and to comply with REF requirements, rather than that it is essential to achieving right retention. What is essential is to make the accepted manuscript downloadable from the repository within 1 month from publication, and therefore it is more essential to act on publication than on acceptance. That is just an observation. The second point I'd like to make there is that we treat all papers the same when we apply rights retention, which is not what we were doing before, but that there is also added complexity. So there's no more laborious Sherpa Romeo journal checking, no more dealing with ambiguous or changing self-archiving policies from publishers, and no more checking of funder requirements, because we assume that if we apply rights retention, we will comply with all funder requirements. So that, in theory, would make things easier for the repository team. But there is also additional metadata to be collected. For example, did the author use the rights retention statement in their communication with the publisher? And generally, there is an intensified communication with authors throughout the life cycle, because we're asking them to include the rights retention statement at an early stage of the life cycle, and then we remind them to deposit and to notify us of the publication, etc. So there's an intensified communication, which is time-consuming. The third observation would be that we are used to change in the repository team, but any transition requires effort, because, well, we probably all remember the experience of REF 2021. We changed our repository working practices on a regular basis as the REF open access policy evolved. So we're quite used to that change. But when introducing a rights retention policy, a transition period in which our staff adapt to new workflows is required, and that means that the work usually takes a little bit more time than before. In addition to that, I'd like to make 3 more observations about how I think the library role evolves. First, there is the attitude to risk. I think adopting a rights retention policy is, in the minds of many, probably a little bit of a risky affair. And I think we need to get over ourselves and stop being so risk averse and maybe be more risk aware. So weighing the benefits against the risks. So I think there's probably a change of attitude there. And it was also useful in our communications with authors to convey that assessment of risks and benefits, because authors are aware of the risks more than they are of the benefits, just as we are. The second observation is that we as a library now for the first time really have a real stake in the publishing process, because we hold a license. Contracts are usually signed between the author and the publisher without the library being involved at all. But now we actually automatically hold a license over the work, and therefore we have an actual stake in the publishing process, which is probably quite useful. And the third observation is our role with regards to copyright. I have the feeling that we always used to be sort of the defenders of the copyright of others, but now we are becoming more the curators of licenses granted to the university and helping authors to empower to use their own rights to the full, rather than defending, the copyright of others, which we should be doing because we shouldn't be breaking the law. But still, there is a shift there, if you like. I probably don't have much time left, Olivia.
You've got 5 minutes left, and that's including questions. So.
Okay, so maybe this should be it then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddy. It's really, really interesting. We have a couple of questions that have come through. And the first is, have you seen any publishers push back and reject articles because they won't accept rights retention? That's from Andrew Walsh. Okay, Andrew, yeah, so that was on my next slide, actually. The answer is no. So there have been no rejections whatsoever. None, 0. And I think also it's probably worth mentioning that when we send official letters of prior notification of the license that authors give us automatically at the start of our policy, no publishers actually wrote back with objections. There were 1 or 2 American publishers who wrote back to say, well, can you please explain what is going on? Which we did, and then they sort of agreed with the whole thing. So I have to say I was really surprised that there has been really no pushback of significance, except from Springer Nature, who's the only publisher who on 2 occasions, and the second occasion was only last week, said, well, we are going to publish this work, so it was not a rejection, but we're not sure about rights retention. So in the first instance, we wrote back to them and said, well, we're going to make this available from the repository without an embargo anyway, whatever you say, because we have the right to do so, because we own a license, because it's been given to us by the author. And then Springer Nature said, well, that's okay then. So in the second case, we're still in negotiations with Springer Nature. And I think I get the impression from the way publishers have responded to our policy, it really depends on which editor you are dealing with. So I have the feeling that a publisher's official stance on rights retention is different from how editors on the call field really respond to submissions with the rights retention statement in it. So that's my experience, Andrew.
Thank you very much. And the second question is from Tanya Williamson, which is that the focus of open access research science so commonly focuses on science and the publication of findings in journal articles. What are the implications of rights retention on arts and humanities or other types of publishing?
Well, I don't know exactly how to answer that one. I think you can see that in the arts and humanities and the social sciences, people publish papers as well. So rights retention would apply to those papers. Rights retention does not apply for us anyway to books and book chapters, although we're going to change that. So in that sense, it would be more difficult to achieve open access for those type of long form publications. But I think that is more or less inherent to the scholarly communication systems that we have inherited. So what we're trying to do to fix that ourselves is that we're going to extend our open access policy to include book chapters in the first instance. So our policy would then apply to both papers in journals or conference proceedings and book chapters. But we don't think we're considering at the moment to extend it to books. I think that's a whole different matter. So in that sense, I think as long as people are publishing papers, everybody's treated equally. That's all I can say about it, but I do see your point. Yeah.
Thank you. We've also had a comment from Louise Smith who said, could this work with books as well? But I think you've answered that one. And a comment from Evelyn Webster. I'm so glad a big uni are doing this because it paves the way for small unis to follow as well, even though we don't have much research weight.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I don't think it really matters whether you are a so-called research intensive or teaching intensive university. We're ourselves at Sheffield Hallam a teaching intensive university. Does it matter whether we have research weight? Will authors from Cambridge and Imperial College be treated differently from authors from Sheffield Hallam University? I really rather doubt it, to be quite honest with you. And if we don't act, then we will never achieve anything. At least that's my my personal stance on this. But fortunately, JISC is currently working on a project to support institutions that are implementing rights retention policies, and they're conducting focus groups for that at the moment. And I think the finding thus far, it seems very likely that they will be making available support for especially small institutions that are trying to implement rights retention, because you do need some resources to understand the legalities of the approach, for example, and JISC would be very well positioned to give that guidance. So I'm really hopeful that that will be coming, well, not soon probably, but in the end we will have it. And if you're stuck, you can always get in touch with those who have already implemented it to share their experiences.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on to the next session, but thank you so much. So our next session is A Tale of Two Cities, which is from Jenny McNally and Catherine Broadley at the University of Salford and Manchester Metropolitan. So I'll hand it over to you now, Jenny and Catherine.
That good?
Yeah, I can see you. I can see your screen.
Excellent. Right, okay. But yes, this presentation from two institutions, although I've managed to leave, oh no, well, you can see from our email addresses which which institutions we're from. So I'm Jenny McNally, I'm digital librarian at Salford University, and Kath, who I'll hand over to in a bit, is a systems discovery librarian. And we've both been doing around understanding how users search for resources. So just a bit of an introduction about why we decided to work together on this. It kind of came out of one of the ALN groups, the Technology Community of Practice, where I mentioned that this was something that I was interested in working on and just was wondering if anybody else was. So it turned out that MMU were working to a similar timeline. And as you can see, even though we are different cities, we are geographically very close. I think looking at that, yeah, we could walk and see each other. We haven't done that yet, but we haven't actually been able to meet in person, which is very nice. And we were both kind of interested in sharing a bit more. I think with systems, it quite often tends to kind of have a network via which systems you're using. And I know in the past when MMU and Salford were both using Talis, we used to have quite a lot to do with each other, but it's kind of because we've ended up on different systems over the years, we've not worked together so much. And also I work at Salford half the week, the other half of the week I work at the Wealth Consortium as their LMS manager, and I've just really seen the value there of collaborating more and kind of working more with other institutions. So I was kind of really interested to work with other libraries as well and find out what they were doing. And from what we were doing, even though obviously there'll be differences across our users, there's kind of the results are of interest to both libraries. There's kind of things that we've pulled out of them both that we can all use. And we've also got different discovery systems. Salford use Ex-Libris's Primo, and MMU have got OCLC. So it was kind of interesting to see if there were differences between how the library was making resources available. So I'll move on to what we did at Salford. We started it because we'd seen a drop in the usage of Primo over the last few years. And obviously there's always been slightly crazy things going on with statistics, analytics and things during COVID and lockdowns, but it had dropped significantly. So I was kind of interested to see if that was something that, there was a reason for this other than just COVID and lockdown, people not being on campus as much. And it has started to climb in the last few years. It started to climb again this year, but still wasn't up to where it had been pre-COVID. And it was just, interesting to find out what was going on, what people were doing. We could also see from looking at e-resource supplier stats that users were accessing those resources from lots of different places. They certainly weren't just going through library tools anymore. Of course, Google Scholar, and lots of other places. And also wanted to think about from a systems point of view where we needed to focus development. As the final question is, it's like, what's the purpose of library discovery? Are we still presenting things in the right way? Are we targeting the right users? Are we targeting the right use cases? But beyond that, it's much wider than just the systems, about how we support users finding resources. Are we telling them right things, giving them right support, and being able to help them wherever they are finding resources? So we kind of started by thinking about what kind of questions we wanted to ask. So these were, where do our users find resources? Obviously we could see some things from the e-resource stats, but we really wanted to drill into that. Are users just using one preferred tool? Are the users just going to Google and not interested in any of the library tools, or are they using lots of different tools and using them for different purposes? Kind of importantly, are they happy or finding the resources they find that they need for their studies and the research? And also, this was kind of the thing that underlies all this kind of thinking around discovery is what is library discovery for when there's Google and Google Scholar? So I got a group together from across the library because, as I said, it's not just systems, it's affecting academic support, collections, metadata, customer services. And we kind of use the Amy Stubbings data-driven analytics framework, which I love for this kind of thing, about really kind of thinking about what you want to do and how to approach it. So I'd really recommend that if anybody's not looked at her book yet, to identify what we wanted to do. So we started by thinking about what those questions were that we wanted to answer. We then decided to kind of look into this. we'd look in more detail at the analytics we could get from the systems and from the resources. We put together a survey of users, and we found the best way to get the responses was to send that out to the schools and ask them to forward it on to their students and ask them to respond. And we also, we hope to do more than this, but as you know, it's not always the easiest to get students and users to take part in interviews, but we did 2 semi-structured interviews with postgraduates. And we weren't allowed to just give people vouchers or payment or anything for taking part in research. It's something that we're not allowed to do at Salford. So instead, we kind of encourage people to take part by having the chance to enter a draw for a voucher. So I'll go on to quite a lot of graphs, and I'll try and keep this very brief because I know I've got to leave time for Kath. But these are the kind of responses we got. So we did get a fairly good number of responses from the survey. We got about 250. And whilst you can see there was quite a weighting on the health and society school, there was kind of a spread from across the other schools as well. And you can see from the level of study as well that we got kind of most from undergraduates, but also some from postgraduates and a few staff as well. So looking at what tools they use, and hindsight's a brilliant thing, we didn't ask this in the best way. I would have kind of, if I do it again, I'd phrase it slightly differently. But as you can see, there's quite a spread of tools there. Library Search is most popular, but Google Scholar coming in also quite high up there, which is interesting. But kind of the bit that we then drilled down to was looking at whether there was effect on the level of study or the school, and we didn't really see a big difference between what level people were studying at or what school subject they were studying at. And that's just an example. I'm not sure how brilliantly the colours are coming up there, but yeah, there wasn't a big difference between whatever kind of factor we looked at the students. We asked them about why they selected tools, and there were lots, you know, these are grouped together, but it was interesting to see that a lot of it was around trusting the resources, tools being easy to use, being able to find a range of resources, kind of the good stuff that you want to hear about people understanding what they need from a resource. So trusted resources were things like, no, it was an academic resource rather than, and that it was reliable information. And also good news in that largely we're really satisfied with their results. Again, would have been nice to drill down to this a bit more, but we kind of came to that into the interviews. And interested to see that nearly every user said that they did use Library Search and that they were very likely to use it in future. And again, that was kind of across all the subjects, levels, kind of thing. And then asked about why they used Library Search. And again, I think it was kind of quite positive that we got the responses back of the kind of reasons why we'd expect people to use Library Search, so what we call primo. So again, the trusted resources, being able to easily access e-resources and access to a wide range of resources and finding it easy to use. And this is one of the comments from the survey, which, you know, it's always nice to hear a positive comment about what you're doing. But I just think it's a really nice comment in that it does show that it's one of those things that it isn't just to do with the system, it's to do with how users access the library and how, you know, it's kind of applies to everything. It applies to training, to support, to the discovery systems. So yeah, this is kind of a relevant thing for everybody in the library. We then, from the surveys, went on to a couple of interviews. As I said, it would have been nice to get a broader range, but these were the people who were keen, or we kind of managed to arrange interviews for. We may go on and try and speak to some undergraduate things in the new academic year. But I think this is quite interesting, both postgraduate students, and I think contrary to what the kind of general thinking is that they were both using Library Search, quite keen to use it. Also using Google Scholar. Google, one of them really didn't like Google or Google Scholar. They'd kind of got a bit of an SEO background and really understood how Google worked and didn't want to use that. But yeah, both really liked using Library Search for their academic work. It was a couple of months ago, so it was quite interesting that ChatGPT was mentioned. It didn't really come out of the survey at all, but it would be interesting to repeat that in the new year and kind of see if that was more of a tool that's being used. So a bit of a summary of what we found out. I mean, obviously, we didn't get a massive range of interviews, but I think the generally UX usability work, you don't expect to need to speak to hundreds of people. You should get quite good feedback from a fairly low number. So, and to be honest, we were just quite glad to get some people to talk to us and be able to come out of this with some kind of ideas of how to move forward. So what we found out was that users did select multiple tools. For example, they don't just use Google or use library search, they do use them both and kind of like to kind of use both in their studies. We didn't see any big correlation between subject, age, level as to what tool they use. So I guess particularly for library search, it's important to bear that in mind when we're making changes. We're not just aiming at undergraduates, we are aiming at everybody. And the things that were, library search is still important for people. It's something they like using, and they, from what the responses we got, they understood what the benefits were. And the kind of things that were important to people when using a tool was they're accessing trusted academic resources, it's easy to use, and they've got access to a wide range of resources. So I'll now hand over to Kath, and I'm going to move on the slides. So I'll try my best to do it at the right time.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. And yeah, if we haven't rehearsed this, so let's see how it goes. Right, so I'm Kath. I'm from Manchester Metropolitan University, so I'm a systems and discovery librarian there. So like Jenny, I look after the library systems and the e-resources. So if you move next slide. So again, a quick on why we wanted to do it. I wanted to know how and why students and staff discover the information they need, and could I use those insights to change what the service that we offer. And I was just curious. One, what did we not know? And two, what were the similarities with Salford as we were working together? So next slide. So what we did, so at Manchester, I was in, I didn't have much time, so because I left it to the last minute. Anyway, but I recruited 8 participants, and I wanted to do a touchstone tour of their devices. So I wanted to watch and talk to them and see how they search for information. And also I implement that with a semi-structured interview. There was some kind of prompter questions that I kind of used to move the hour along. And I had a mixture of students, staff and researchers. So I got some data, over to the next slide. And I used the affinity mapping kind of method to analyze that data quickly, because I had all these notes and transcriptions from videos. So I wanted to organize it to something I could report upon. So I used the affinity mapping method, where you put each comment onto a post-it note and cite them. It's like observation, problem, praise, idea, and just see what themes emerged from the conversations I'd been having and the observations I'd been making while I was having those conversations. And a plug to the Academic Libraries North UX toolkit there, and the training that it did for us recently on this particular method was incredibly timely. So on to the next slide. The themes that come out, I just want to pick out a few, because even though I only spoke to 8 people, loads of themes and ideas came out of that discussion, those discussions. Generally, the people who preferred print books really preferred print books. They went to massive methods to get them from other places, and they also did a lot of printing out to read. Google and Google Scholar rather than library search for the discovery side of things. And 2 particular students raised how disappointed they were that we didn't have a massive non-fiction collection that they can use to improve their their skills other than what they were learning. So they were coming and they wanted to make themselves rounded people and learn about financial, personal finance, sustainability, things other than their course that they were doing. So that came out from that conversation. Next slide. And then there were some themes that were just relating to library search. So again, just picking out a couple rather than just going through them all. There were things that I expected around, like, sometimes the relevancy of the results it's found and its functionality. And things I'd found that matched research my colleagues had done about how our students navigate to library search is not via the library website. And then there are also some things I didn't expect, which was like library search was more for known item searching, not for discovery, which seems to match what Jenny's interviews kind of said, which was, again, that's just interesting just from talking today. And yeah, and that's kind of like some people just used it to locate print books and used it as like a traditional, like the old style catalogue, which I was a bit surprised about. But maybe that's my focus because I'm very e-resource focused. So on to the next slide. So to use those themes, I was using them to create user stories. So again, me and Jenny we've come from very different pathways. I'm more like, oh, think of the story, think of the feelings, and then use them to summarize the research and trying to make that to get change. So if we move on to the next slide. So stories should have goal, motivation, context, and then the insights. So the insights might be your aha moment. That's what I found, or that was the change. And then the spectacle would be great if you could like video it. So I've just got a little bit of a story now. So on to my next slide that I've just written out of the research that I've done. So I've got a couple of minutes. So here's just my story. Elise is doing a PhD, just the love of it. So that's the goal and motivation. A context, she's never been on campus. She works full time as well as doing research, and she loves to work surrounded by paper. She tries to find out and work out things for herself before asking for help. Before she joined MMU, she used to Google free resources and bought books, and she planned her reading for when she would be part of MMU and get access to all the paywall stuff. And then once she enrolled, she systematically worked through all the library online tools. She found futile searches, and she said she's ridiculously independent and didn't like to ask for help. She had an amazing subject librarian who interviewed her to database, but she still felt really angry with herself that she hadn't worked it all out for herself. But at that point, she decided Google was for books and the library was for journal articles, known item journal articles, really. Then she figured out that she could use the institutional login route to access library subscribed journals discovered via a Google Scholar search. And that was a game changer for her. No one had told her about this. She just worked it out for herself. So if we move on to the next slide. So the observation that I found by talking to this particular, to Elise, isn't her real name, during the Touchstone tour, I saw that it took her 16 steps to get to that full text article, and I was really shocked. 16 steps. And I thought, oh, well, amazing. All these library discovery tools we could use that could have got her at least to that PDF without all the clicks. Like LibKey would have got us to 2 clicks. Lean would have got her in 2 clicks. There's so many that like she could just searching on library search 1-2 clicks. Or so I thought. So on to the next slide. When I checked, so the actual insight is when I actually checked whether these tools would have got to that article, turns out there was a weird quirk with that article because of the age of it. The metadata was weird. So our tools would have told her that it wasn't available. So her uphill route would have got her to the article to the best results. We, as Manchester Met, we were still supporting her like the cyclist getting the drink from the car. We were enabling her to get to log in. We were giving her that route. We were managing that and maintaining that. And the insight for me, the actual insight, was to have more respect for the system that we have. When I'm activating new resources, make sure I do all the ways that people can get to access things. So that's just one little user story and one insight that came out of this one person's doing it in a kind of user story method. So next slide. So just do the next steps that we're going to do is we're going to use these user stories to ask questions, to do the kind of how might me questions, and see if we can use that to spark ideas. And the next one. And then prototype, think about things we can change, things that we can try out because of those ideas that we've done, and then evaluate what we've done. They might be rubbish, we might not want to do it. And then let's get on to the next slide. Yeah, the what's next. Well, here at MMU, I'm not the only person asking questions or doing UX, so we're going to get together and share our findings and do some more ideation because I love that. And then we're going to get together with Jenny and talk through more ideas, get more perspectives. And I just want to throw back to Jenny on the what's next bit.
Yeah, I think we've come up with fairly not dissimilar what's next, but yeah, I haven't had a chance to share this with library colleagues apart from the small group that was working on it, so you kind of want to share that and think about if there's anything that we'd do differently, kind of what actions we want to take. Also mentioned earlier, ChatGPT would like to revisit in the new year, one to talk to a wider range of students, particularly undergraduates, but also thinking about the impact of AI and if that's kind of changed what approach people take. I think.
Yep, that's it. Oh, questions. Yeah, we always put the questions slide in.
Thank you very much, Kath and Jen. We haven't had any questions yet, so if anyone wants to type any in now, then just pop them in now. I can wait a few minutes to see if there's any questions pop up. I do have a question though. What impact might AI, do you think, have on the user experience, or are you just kind of scoping out? You don't know yet.
I think for me it's kind of keeping an eye on it and seeing what happens and being kind of aware. I guess, well, I think there was something this week where I thought, what was it? It was something to do with citations or something in Primo, where they actually are already using AI to improve that, or to improve citation search. I'm like, oh, it's probably there's probably lots of things where it's already being used and we're just not really aware of it because it's not, you know, really visible and changing how you search. But I think with lots of things, when kind of new stuff comes in that lots of people are using, it almost changes the expectation of library resources, and so kind of how you then develop it to kind of fit in with those respects. But yeah, I think very much I won't even pretend that I've got how it's going to change discovery, but that we're kind of keeping an eye on it and kind of keeping an open mind to what could happen. But yeah, Kath, if you.
Yeah, we're the same. We're just being open to what it could be. But I was really interested in your research, bringing it up and talking about it in how they might progress their research.
Oh, thank you. We've had a comment from Louise Smith saying thanks so much, that they'd definitely like to do some UX and mapping exercises at UCLan. I suppose, would you have any advice for people who want to sort of do these exercises in the future?
Just do it. Just don't faff for ages. Just go out and do it, because even though you might only speak to a few people, you just get really lovely, really amazing insights, and people want to talk and want to share, and it's just been a privilege to be able to talk to people.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think that's the end of our session. So thank you to both of our presenters. And we've had one more question, which I'll ask quickly, which is what time of year did you do your?
I did it at the wrong time of year because I was in a bit of a panic, and I did it exam time, so I didn't get any undergraduates. So mine was, don't do it at exam time. But any time's good, because otherwise you put it off and you think, oh, I can't do it at September, can't do it at Christmas. I would say just do it anytime. Since I did it during assessment week, and I still got masters and staff talking to me.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'll have to bring it to a close there now. So thank you so much. And just to let everyone know that we're in a break now till 10:40, and then after that we've got our gold sponsor presentation, which is OCLC.